Welcome to Modern Application Development Screencast. In this short screencast, we'll learn how to document a RESTful API using OpenAPI specification. Also, we'll try and explore some of the tools that we can use to explore the OpenAPI specifications or to execute some of the API calls. Okay. First of all, let's go with the definition of what is OpenAPI specification. We can just get it from Wikipedia or any other place. It's just a machine readable format for describing, producing and consuming as well as visualizing RESTful web services. If you are actually developing a RESTful web service or you are designing a RESTful web service, then you need a way to document it so that you can share it with the rest of the folks. And OpenAPI specification is one such format that you could use to document it. Beyond documentation, it can also be used by machines to actually consume it and do certain other things. It can even automatically generate client codes or server-side codes based on the specification itself. There are many other uses to it. I think you can explore more. The specification itself was called Swagger specification earlier and then renamed to OpenAPI specification. Currently it's in version 3.03 and here you can find the details of it if you really want to go through it. Yeah, usually expressed as JSON files or any YAML files. Let's see one of the API specifications. Most of you would have heard about CoWin APIs. You can see that the API specification or the documentation is open and is accessible at this URL, right? And you can see that API version is 1.3.1 and specification itself is OS 3, right? And you can read more about it. Let's just explore some of the particulars of this documentation. Here you can see that the servers available are 2 servers against which you can run the APIs, and there is some kind of authorization that is required to run the APIs. You can click on authorize. Okay, it requires a bearer auth in the header to run the APIs. Now each API is defined, a method is defined, path is defined, path is attached to this path, right? Like if you have https://cdn-api.co/win.in/api/v2 auth public generate OTP is the full path, right? And then it has a description. It has a method called post. What are the input parameters if there are any input parameter? Example is it's a JSON, takes the mobile number. You can see here the input type is application JSON, and the responses, if everything worked well, it will return 200 with successful operation, and also will return a transaction ID as a response, and the response is application JSON. Similarly, if there is something wrong with the input, it will have 400 as the status code, and it will return our application JSON, but it will return an error code and an error message, or here with error called error. Similarly, 401 if it's not authenticated, and 500 if it's an internal server. This is for one of the post requests, and you can even try it out. If you had a real authorized key, you can click on try it out and you can execute. If you execute now, I think it might throw an error because we don't have an authorized key, right? Otherwise, you can even execute directly from here, from the documentation. So that's the best part, right? And you can also explore other APIs. There are many other available APIs. I think API Setu is one of those directories that you can go and explore by yourself. Now, this is a rendered format of the documentation as HTML, application. What is that machine readable file that we were talking about, whether it's in JSON or YAML format? that is this, right? It's the same thing. This is the source code of this API description, right? And this is described as an YAML. You can see that, CoWin public APIs is the title of the APIs that you can see. You can see it here, right? And then terms of service or contact, other details of it all have been rendered from this source code here, right? So virtually, when you're actually trying to describe an API or document an API, you're going to write a document like this in YAML or the other format JSON, right? Then you will render and display it to folks or anyone else so that they can see and explore the APIs. So for example, if you are a developer and you are expected to develop all these APIs on the server side, then probably the designer of these APIs would have sent you this document and asked you to develop it, because you know the input, you know the output, you know the authentication, and you know where it needs to be hosted. On the other side, if you're a consumer of this API, for example, if you're developing an application or a mobile application or a web application, and you want to use these APIs, if you want to implement these APIs or you consume these APIs, you can just access this documentation and get all the details that is required to consume these APIs. You don't need to go to the developer and ask, what is the output, how does it look, because you can literally look at, for example, confirm OTP. What does this return? Okay, this returns a token, right? It's very clear. And what does it take as input parameters? It takes two attribute JSON as input parameters with two elements. One is OTP and other is transaction ID. How does it authorize? It needs an authorize, right? So all of this is very, very clearly defined. So you can just directly consume it without, even talking to developer of the service. That's the advantage of OpenAPI. Now, we know that we have to develop this. If you are a developer of the API services, you need to actually write a document like this. Can you write it manually? Yes, you can write it manually, but you can also use some tools to write it, in an easy way. Swagger itself has an open source tool called Swagger Editor. It's a web-based editor. You can have a look at it here. Here is the code, and here is how the rendered version looks like. This is a generic Swagger pet store where they have defined multiple APIs. Pet, a store, and a user. Right? For example, user has login, logout, get user, update user, etc., etc. And similarly, for example, pet has an updated existing pet. Put is usually used for updating existing pet. Post is used for creating a pet store. Get is used for getting the pets, getting specific pet by status, and then creating a pet, and etc., etc. So those are all defined here that you can use, and those are all rendered based on the code here. Now let's clear this and start our own. Let's do our own, right? You can clear the editor, right? And then let's start by adding some higher level documentation for our database that we had, application that we had. Let's say we were creating an API for this. Let's say we were just creating an API for user, the CRUD API for the user. That the user table has a very simple structure. It has only 3 columns: user ID, username, and email, where user ID is auto generated. When the username and email is provided by the end consumer who's going to create the user, right? So let's create an API for that, right? And based on before we create an API, we actually like to document it. So let's create a documentation for the API, right? So let's start with adding a top level details, right? That would be, just give me a second. I will just paste it instead of typing so that it will be faster, right? I'm just going to increase the screen resolution. Okay, let's just add some top level details of an example OpenAPI. Right, I'm just saying it for a second, just ignore the error. We are saying I'm going to define the OpenAPI 3.0 like the documentation itself, and then name of my APIs is example OpenAPI, and then some description I've added, what kind of API it is and stuff like that. Here I'm just giving a general description, and then you can add some diagrams too if you want to. I can write a quick diagram, go to some mermaid, design a diagram by writing the diagram code here, and then just copy paste the URL and embed it, right? So for example, I can just embed it. So if this is a path, since this part of the documentation takes HTML and Markdown, I can just embed it an image here, right? Right, so it embeds. So what I've done here, this is simple, image creator, where you write image by code and then it creates an image, right? It's called a mermaid. You can use any other image creator, but this is just an easy tool and an open source tool to create images. So for example, you can add an extra column here, string, let's say date, creation date, for example. Creation date will be a date. Okay, things like that. You can just edit and make the table structure so that it's easy for end user how the table structure looks like, and then you can just copy the image path and add it to your editor so that your documentation has that. Then I have an error codes table where I want to list error codes for what resource, for user resource, what is the error code and what is the error message, so that the user knows what kind of error it throws. Currently we have not added any operations, so it says operations are not defined. Let's add an operation. So I'm just going to add an operation by adding a path, right? So I'm just going to not going to go through detail of everything. You might have to explore it yourself. Most probably you can pick up like an existing API documentation and modify it so that it's easy, or you can use like a completely GUI based editors, so that it becomes easy. And I will share some links to the GUI based editors too. So you can either add it manually by typing it here, or you can just click on insert, add path item and add the details here, and that would appear here, right? For example, the path to add, we can say /API. I'm just going to add a path, right? And description of the path will be right, and I'm just going to paste same thing here. It has added all the details here, and it's easy to do that. If you don't want to do that, you can I'm just going to copy paste some of the details here directly so that I can just explain it to you without taking much time, right? Right. So I've added here details so that for all the users, so it becomes easy. So here I defined server. You can define multiple servers, where locally we usually generally run it at 127.0.0.1 and 5000 /. So that's what we have added. For example, if you want to add other servers, you can just add more. The next one is paths. Like I said, you can insert basic here. I've just pasted it here. So the path will look like slash API slash user slash username is a variable, right, in like that we are going to pass to the APIs to get the details of the thing. So here is the username, for example. So then you can give the description which appears here. Then you can say in parameters that this API requires, and in where, in path. So this is a parameter in path of the URL, and it's required, and what is the kind of what is the type of variable it is, which is, username is a string, and an example which is Ali. So you can see it here, right? And what happens on success? On success, you return user ID, username, and email. That's what this table has. Once successfully inserted, it will return the whole thing, right? And then if there is a bad request, what are we going to return, etc., etc., right? If we are going to return an error message. So I think I must have missed it. How does an error message look like? For example, I can add it, to the 400 year. That whenever there is a bad request, it will return a JSON with the error code and the error message. And there is, if there is URL not found, if there is a mistake, then it will return 404, or the user is not found, it will return 404, and then 500 if there is an internal server error. So these are the standard path. Similarly, put is an update. It updates the user given by this username, and then username is the input. And currently we can just update only the email because that's the only other thing that's allowed to be updated. User ID is auto generated, you can't update, and username usually we consider it as unique and non-alterable, so that can't be updated. Once it's updated, if everything goes down, it will return the updated object. If it couldn't update for some reason, for example, we are updating a duplicate email ID, then it will show in message. Similarly, delete. If it deletes, it will just return 200 successfully deleted. If it can't delete, for example, if you are trying to delete a username Tejesh GN, but it has an article, right? You can't delete it because you have to have a relationship in article authors that won't allow you to delete. Basically, you have to delete everything if you delete an article user. So basically you might want to send an error saying it has relationships, we can't delete articles first, and then you can delete one user. So basically, to delete a user, he shouldn't have any articles. So you can have multiple other conditions that can be coded as error messages. Similarly, post is at /user. This is a different path, for example. That's why there will be a second path defined. I'll just expand it here. Here, this is the second path defined, in which there is no username because we don't have the username, and that takes username and email as input, because if you're trying to insert into user table, you need username and email, right? And then it returns, if everything goes well, it returns 201, or it can even return sometimes a whole object based on how someone has designed the API. Basically, if you have designed like that, then you return that. If there's an error, for example, duplicate email or duplicate username, or username has space, all those errors will be returned as 400 status code, and then error message and error code. This is how we usually describe the APIs. Now, if you're going to use this API, you know how to use it. In this API, we have not defined any authorization or like authentication or authorization. Hence, that is not showing up. Otherwise, it would have shown up. Right now, you have the whole thing as documented. Right, it's much clearer. You don't need to look into code to see what it's doing. You have the APIs clearly defined here as a documentation. Now, you can also, share this YAML with anyone. You can just download the file, and share it with someone. Or you can just, if it's not a secretive API or not a private API, you can just add it to GitHub or go to gist and add it and share the URL. For example, here, right, it's simple YAML file. If you want to view it, you can just click on the raw here and copy the raw data and then, paste it here. Or you can just go to Swagger UI, which is by default shows, a pet store. You can just copy this YAML file URL and, paste it here and click on explore. It just shows the whole API documentation here, which is easy to view. There are many other places where you can view this, many other tools available to view this. Couple of examples are, there is one called Rapidoc. Let me just show that to you just as an example. This is another one which again, you have to give an URL to it. I'll just copy paste this URL, paste it here and click on open, and it renders and shows it to you how the API looks like. They all might render in different ways, but they all have similar functionalities. But I think I would say best would be to use Swagger UI or Swagger editor to see and explore, right? Brindoc is also quite nice. You can use it. There are other ones. You can also use, a thick client or a local installed client called Insomnia. Let me just open that quickly for you to explore it, right? You can search Insomnia REST API. This is an open source tool that you can use, install locally, and you can use. For example, when you open it locally, it looks like this. Here I've pasted the same YAML file and it renders here on the right side. You can try it out, right? You can try it out, the same thing. It's locally done. You can also do other things in this. This is a very extensive tool to explore this. You can also click on test and then create new test suite, or click on debug and get all these APIs here. For example, when I go to post, it auto populates example JSON, then auto populates the base URL from the environment defined in the YAML, and then gives all the things. You can even try and send. Currently no server is running in 127 locally at 5000 port. No server is running. If it was running, it would have accessed and shown you the result, right? So you can use Insomnia too. There are many other tools to explore the APIs. I think I would want you to go and explore yourself. There is this site which lists all the open source tools, or even some of the closed source tools which are related to OpenAPI. So you can go explore so many tools available. Like I think the one which has GitHub is mostly open source, so you can try them and explore. So most probably what's going to happen, the thing that's going to happen is someone is going to design this documentation and give you this documentation and ask you to implement the APIs. So what would you do? You would take this document and then read through this document, see the details of the documentation, create the table, create the Flask RESTful APIs, and test that against this API documentation. So this API documentation has all the inputs and outputs for you to test. And also he would have defined the error codes for you to return as error whenever there is an error. Things like that. That's one case. The other case is you already built these APIs and you want someone else to use. Then you will actually write this documentation yourself and tell them, here my APIs are exposed to the world to be used if you are authenticated or authorized, and here are the details of the API. Those are the two scenarios which you will probably use this API documentation most probably. And and you would actually find many of these documentation in the in the open world on internet on any of the service providers. I would suggest you to go to API Setu and explore them. There are also other commercial players who expose their APIs as OpenAPI documentation. I suggest you to explore them as well. That's it. Thank you so much for watching.